Number 1 says to factor each trinomial by guess and check. The first question you ask yourself on any factoring problem is there a GCF? And number 1 doesn't have a GCF between 113 and 36, so there's not. So it's basically, what can I multiply to get x squared? X times x. What can I multiply to get 36 that adds up to 13? Well, I can do 1 times 36, 2 times 18, 3 times 12, 4 times 9, 5 won't work. I can do 6 times 6. That's a complete list of everything that can multiply to get 36. Now, which set of those factors adds up to 13? It's the 4 and the 9, so that's a plus 4 and a plus 9. For number 3, what can I multiply to get 40 that adds up to 14? So to multiply to get 40, I can do 1 times 40, 2 times 20, 3 won't go into 40, I can do 4 times 10, I can do 5 times 8, 7 won't work, and then 8's already on my list, so there's a complete list. So which set of those numbers adds up to 14? It was 4 and 10. So it's positive 4, positive 10. Number 5, what can I multiply to get 16 that adds up to 10? I'm going to do 1 times 16, 2 times 8, or 4 times 4. Well, 2 and 8 add up to 10. So plus 2 plus 8. Number 7, what can I multiply to get positive 6 that adds up to negative 7? Well, I can do negative 1 times negative 6. I can do negative 2 times negative 3. And a negative 1 and a negative 6 add up to negative 7. So it's a negative 1 and it's a negative 6. Number 9, what can I multiply to get a positive 24 that adds up to a negative 11? I can do 1 times 24, 2 times 12, 3 times 8. So I know it's 3 and 8, but to multiply to be a positive, the signs have to be the same. To add to be a negative, they both have to be negative. Number 11, what can I multiply to get negative 27 that adds up to positive 6? It's 3 and 9, but to multiply to be a negative, the signs have to be different. 6 is positive, which means 9 has to be positive and 3 has to be negative. Number 13, what can I multiply to get negative 2 that adds up to negative 1? The only thing I multiply to get 2 is 2 and 1, but if them add up to be a negative 1, the 2 is the one that has to be negative and the 1 has to be positive. Number 15, what can I multiply to get negative 45 that adds up to negative 4? It's 9 and 5. To multiply to be negative, the sign's got to be different. 9 is bigger. It had to add up to a negative 4, so the 5 had to be positive. Number 4, this is a binomial. Okay, when you factor a binomial, you look for GCF. So my greatest common factor between 4 and 6 is 2. They have an x in common. The lowest exponent was x to the first. So then you divide each of these by 2x. Negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. X squared divided by x is x. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3, and the x's cross out. So now if I distributed that, I would get negative 4x squared minus 6x. Greatest common factor between 15 and 1, or 15 and 7 is 1, so the only thing they really have in common is the b. So if I divide out the b on the bottom is going to cancel one of the b's on the top, leave me with negative 15b. And those b's cross out, leave me with a 7. Number 12, this is not factored because there's a minus sign outside the parentheses, but they have an m minus 2 in common. So if I divide out m minus 2, those are going to cross out, those are going to cross out, that leaves me with 5 minus m. Same thing on number 14. Or no, number 14 doesn't have anything in common. So this cannot be factored. You can't write the problem as the answer because the direction said to factor, so you can't leave a minus sign outside of parentheses. So that cannot be factored. Number 16, if you're going to factor by grouping, you can group the first two, you can group the last two. So the greatest common factor between 6 and 4 is 2. They have an x squared in common. So if I divide out a 2x squared, 6 divided by 2 is 3. And then subtract 3 minus 2, I'm going to leave with x. 4 divided by 2 is 2. The x squareds cross out. Then I've got plus, and there's nothing to factor. The greatest common factor between 3x and 2 is 1. So it's 1 times 3x plus 2. And then that's not factor because this plus sign's outside parentheses, but they have in common a 3x plus 2, so that's my greatest common factor. If I divide out that 3x plus 2, what am I left with? I'm left with 2x squared plus 1. Number 22, group the first two, group the last two. 6 and 3 have a common factor of 3. B squared and b have a common factor of b, so I'm going to divide out a 3b. So 6 divided by 3 is 2. B squared divided by b is b. Negative 3 divided by positive 3 is a negative 1, and the b's cross out. Greatest common factor between 4 and 8 is 4, so I can divide out a 4. 4 divided by 4 is 1. Negative 8b divided by 4 is negative 2b. And then 2b and negative 2b, negative 1 and positive 1 are opposites. So I can multiply the 4 by a negative 1, and I can multiply the parentheses by negative 1, because a negative 1 times a negative 1 is positive 1. So that's 3b times 2b minus 1, and then 4 times negative 1 is negative 4. When I multiply 1 times negative 2b times negative 1, the signs switch, so I'm going to have a positive 2b, and I'm going to have a negative 1. And now I have a common factor of 2b minus 1. I divide that out, and I'm left with 3b minus 4.